On a quiet December evening in the city of Bobo-Dioulasso, a Nigerian military cargo plane touched the ground unexpectedly. What was described as an emergency landing quickly turned into a regional alert. 11 soldiers were detained. Air defenses were raised. Radios across Burkina Faso carried a tone that many families had not heard before. For an elderly grandmother listening from her home, this was not about geopolitics. It was about whether the skies above her grandchildren had suddenly become unsafe. In a region where borders were once crossed for work, family, and trade, a single aircraft revealed how fragile peace can be when trust erodes. This moment forces us to pause and reflect. When nations harden their defenses, do they protect ordinary people, or do they place them closer to danger? That question sits at the heart of today's Sahel. Under the leadership of figures like Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have chosen a new path, breaking away from ECOWAS and distancing themselves from France in the name of sovereignty and self-determination. Their message is clear. Security must be owned, decisions must be local, and the future must no longer be dictated from afar. Yet history teaches us something sobering. Independence is not only declared, it is tested. It is tested in moments of confusion, in split-second military decisions, and in how leaders respond when events spiral beyond intention. For many Americans who value stability, family safety, and clear lines of authority, the question is not whether sovereignty matters. It does. The deeper question is whether the choices unfolding in the Sahel are building lasting order or quietly inviting new risks. As we look at the creation of a new Sahelian development bank and the tightening of military posture across borders, we must ask ourselves something uncomfortable. Are these signs of strength that will calm a wounded region, or early warnings of a future shaped more by fear than by peace? Before forming an opinion, stay with this story. Because what happens next in Burkina Faso and the Sahel will not remain confined to Africa. It will echo far beyond its borders. The turning point that brought the Sahel Alliance into sharper focus did not begin with a speech or a summit, but with a quiet chain of decisions made behind closed doors. After years of dependence on regional and foreign financial systems, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced the creation of the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, a financial institution designed to fund roads, energy, agriculture, and long-term infrastructure on their own terms. For supporters of Ibrahim Traoré, this bank represents dignity. It promises to replace short-term, high-interest commercial loans with patient capital meant to serve national priorities rather than external agendas. To a farmer outside Ouagadougou, this is not theory. It means whether irrigation canals are repaired before the dry season, whether crops reach markets without spoiling, and whether his children will need to leave home to survive. Yet even as the bank is presented as a pillar of sovereignty, it exposes the first major test of this new path. Capital must come from somewhere. Risk must be absorbed by someone. And credibility must be earned in a global system that rewards predictability over defiance. Supporters argue that reported capital nearing $1 billion can unlock regional trade and reduce dependence on coastal neighbors. Critics quietly ask how a young institution can survive economic shocks, political pressure, and security instability at the same time. This tension is not abstract. It plays out daily in markets, villages, and border towns, where people measure success not by ideology, but by stability. In mid-December, that fragile balance was shaken when a Nigerian military transport aircraft made an emergency landing in Bobo Dioulasso. Burkina Faso authorities detained 11 Nigerian soldiers and described the incident as an unauthorized military entry. Nigeria responded by insisting the landing was caused by technical failure during a routine flight. Within hours, air defenses were placed on alert and warnings were issued that future violations would be treated as hostile acts. For a retired schoolteacher listening to the evening news, the message was chilling. A misunderstanding between states had suddenly turned the sky into a potential battlefield. This was not a clash of armies, but a clash of interpretations, and in regions with long histories of conflict, interpretations matter as much as facts. Supporters of the Sahel Alliance saw the response as overdue firmness, proof that sovereignty now has meaning. Skeptics saw something else entirely, a reminder that security doctrines harden faster than communication systems can adapt. In the middle of this moment lies the ordinary soldier, young, undertrained, and newly entrusted with decisions once shaped by foreign partners. He is told he is defending the nation, yet he also knows that a single error could ignite consequences far beyond his control. This is where viewers should pause and reflect. Strength can reassure, but it can also narrow options. Firm borders can protect families, but they can also turn accidents into crises. As the Sahel Alliance presses forward with its bank, its joint security force, and its political separation from ECOWAS, the stakes rise with every decision. The world may debate strategy, but families feel outcomes. And if you believe that order exists to protect life rather than intimidate it, this moment deserves careful thought. Because what looks like resolve today may demand restraint tomorrow. And as these nations move deeper into uncharted territory, one question grows harder to ignore. Was the aircraft incident a warning sign that systems are being tested before they are ready? Or the first proof that the Sahel has finally learned how to draw its own lines? The answer to that question will shape what comes next, and it leads directly into the most dangerous part of this story. What followed the aircraft incident was not chaos, but something more unsettling: silence mixed with hardened positions. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, officials spoke carefully, choosing words that projected control and resolve. Statements emphasized sovereignty, warning that the era of tolerated violations was over. For supporters of Ibrahim Traoré and the Sahel Alliance, this was the moment they had waited for. After decades of foreign military presence, unclear mandates, and blurred lines of authority, the alliance was finally signaling that it would define security on its own terms. Crowds in some neighborhoods expressed pride, seeing the response as proof that the Sahel was no longer passive. But in other homes, the reaction was quieter and more anxious. A mother in a border town wondered whether heightened alert meant her son, recently enlisted, would be sent into a situation he barely understood. For her, strong language from leaders did not automatically translate into safety. Beyond the region, reactions diverged sharply. Some African commentators framed the response as a necessary correction to years of imbalance, arguing that without firm lines, deterrence is meaningless. Others warned that symbolism can outpace capacity. They pointed to practical realities that rarely make headlines: incompatible communication systems, uneven training, and the sheer scale of Sahelian territory. History offers sobering lessons. Previous joint security efforts in the region collapsed not because of ideology, but because coordination failed under pressure. International observers took note as well. In Europe, analysts spoke of escalation risks and the possibility of miscalculation between neighboring states already strained by insurgency and smuggling. In Washington, the tone was more cautious than public. American policymakers have long viewed the Sahel through the lens of counter-terrorism and regional spillover. What unsettled them was not the assertion of sovereignty itself, but the speed at which military posture appeared to harden while diplomatic mechanisms lagged behind. For the United States, stability is not measured by declarations, but by whether markets open on time, borders remain predictable, and families are not forced to flee. Here lies the emotional core of this moment. Power, once claimed, demands discipline. The ability to stop an aircraft is meaningless if the systems that prevent misunderstanding are not equally strong. Midway through this story, viewers should consider something deeply personal. Most people do not fear strength. They fear uncertainty. They fear a world where accidents turn into confrontations and where young soldiers are asked to make irreversible choices in seconds. Faith traditions, including those familiar to many Americans, teach that authority exists to restrain violence, not invite it. This is not a call for weakness, but for wisdom. The Sahel Alliance now stands at a crossroads where every action is interpreted through suspicion or hope. Supporters see a rising Africa reclaiming dignity. Critics see a region compressing too many changes into too little time. Both cannot be fully wrong. As reactions ripple outward, one reality becomes unavoidable. The incident has altered expectations. Neighbors are recalculating, investors are watching, and ordinary people are quietly adjusting their sense of what tomorrow might bring. The question is no longer whether the Sahel Alliance has the right to defend its airspace. The question is whether its leaders can balance firmness with restraint before a more serious test arrives. Because if a single emergency landing can trigger alerts and detentions, what happens when the next incident is not accidental at all? That unanswered question carries us directly into the consequences now facing civilians and governments alike. As the political statements faded from the headlines, the consequences of the Sahel Alliance's new posture began to settle into everyday life. For civilians across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, security is not an abstract doctrine. It is measured in whether roads are safe at dawn, whether markets open without fear, and whether families can plan for the next season without preparing for flight. In towns near borders, traders quietly adjusted routes, unsure how new security rules might be enforced from one week to the next. A small livestock dealer who once crossed freely to sell cattle now hesitates, worried that tightened controls or sudden alerts could strand him far from home. For him, sovereignty does not arrive as a speech. It arrives as uncertainty. Politically, the alliance's firm stance has strengthened central authority. Governments now speak with a unified voice, projecting decisiveness and resolve. Supporters argue that this consolidation is long overdue, that fractured governance allowed insecurity to spread unchecked. They point to renewed confidence among state institutions and a sense that national dignity has been restored. Yet consolidation carries its own cost. When power tightens, dissent grows quieter, and mistakes become harder to challenge before they deepen. In communities already strained by poverty and displacement, silence can be as dangerous as chaos. Families who have lived through cycles of conflict know that escalation often begins not with violence, but with narrowed options. Migration patterns are also shifting. When borders harden unpredictably, people do not stop moving. They move differently. Some take longer, more dangerous routes. Others send younger family members ahead, hoping distance will offer safety. These choices quietly reshape societies long before statistics catch up. For political leaders, the challenge is balancing legitimacy with control. The Sahel Alliance has promised to deliver security first, arguing that stability must precede political transitions. For some citizens, that promise brings relief. For others, it raises concern that temporary measures may become permanent. The absence of clear timelines and transparent benchmarks leaves space for doubt. Investors and aid partners watch closely. Development funds hesitate when security risks feel volatile, and hesitation delays projects that civilians desperately need. This creates a feedback loop where insecurity discourages investment, and lack of investment fuels insecurity. In the middle of this loop stands the ordinary household. A father wonders whether to repair his home or save money for sudden travel. A mother debates whether to keep her children in school or closer to safety. These are not ideological decisions. They are survival calculations. Here lies a moment of reflection for viewers. Stability is not only the absence of foreign influence, it is the presence of predictability. It is knowing that tomorrow will resemble today, closely enough to plan a life. Strong states can provide that certainty, but only if restraint grows alongside authority. Without it, power can deepen fear, even as it claims to reduce it. As the Sahel Alliance pushes forward with its security-first model, political capital is being spent rapidly. Every alert, every detention, every hardened statement draws from a limited reserve of public trust. The question now facing Burkina Faso and its partners is whether this reserve can be replenished through improved daily life, or whether it will erode under the weight of unresolved tension. Because when civilians begin to feel that safety depends more on luck than on institutions, loyalty shifts quietly. And as these societies absorb the political and human costs of rapid change, one critical issue moves to the foreground: how the world, and especially powerful external actors, respond to this evolving reality may show whether these consequences stabilize or spiral. That question leads directly to the global stage and the role of the United States. From Washington's perspective, what is unfolding in the Sahel is neither distant nor abstract. For decades, American policymakers have viewed this region through a narrow but urgent lens: counterterrorism, migration pressure, and regional spillover that can destabilize allies. The rise of the Sahel Alliance under leaders like Ibrahim Traoré complicates that picture. On one hand, the United States understands the appeal of local ownership. Foreign military footprints have often failed to deliver lasting security, and sovereignty resonates with American values more than many assume. On the other hand, U.S. strategists are trained to look past declarations and focus on systems. They ask whether command structures are resilient, whether communication channels prevent miscalculation, and whether security forces can act with discipline under stress. The aircraft incident in Burkina Faso did not alarm Washington because of its outcome, which was ultimately contained. but because of what it revealed. A region with rising alert levels, limited transparency, and compressed decision timelines increases the risk of unintended escalation. For American families concerned about global stability, these risks matter. Instability in the Sahel can accelerate migration toward Europe, disrupt supply chains tied to strategic minerals, and create vacuums that extremist groups exploit. None of these outcomes serve U.S. interests, nor do they serve the people of West Africa. Allies in Europe share similar concerns. While some sympathize with the Sahel Alliance's desire to break from old arrangements, they quietly question whether security-first governance, without clear political roadmaps, can hold. Investors, too, watch cautiously. Capital avoids uncertainty, and uncertainty grows when military posture outpaces diplomatic reassurance. Here is where reflection becomes necessary. Strength earns respect when it is predictable. Authority builds confidence when it is restrained. These principles are not ideological. They are practical lessons learned through decades of conflict management. For viewers who value order, family safety, and a world where crises do not multiply unchecked, the Sahel presents a test of balance rather than allegiance. The United States is unlikely to rush back into the region, but it will not ignore it either. Engagement today may be quieter, more conditional, and more focused on outcomes than rhetoric. Whether that approach succeeds depends not only on Washington, but on choices made in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. As global attention sharpens, the margin for error narrows. And that raises a final unsettling question. If the next incident in the Sahel is larger, faster, and less ambiguous than an emergency landing, will existing channels be strong enough to prevent a crisis that no one intends, but everyone fears? As this story draws to a close, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Sahel Alliance, under leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, is no longer experimenting at the margins. It is reshaping power, security, and economic direction at the center of West Africa. A new development bank, a hardened military posture, and a clear rejection of old frameworks signal confidence and resolve. But history reminds us that moments of transformation are also moments of greatest vulnerability. For civilians, the cost of miscalculation is never theoretical. It is paid in disrupted lives, fractured families, and futures placed on hold. Security that reassures today must still protect tomorrow. If it does not, it risks becoming another source of fear. For many Americans watching from afar, especially those who have lived through Cold War standoffs, regional conflicts, and global uncertainty, this pattern feels familiar. Strength without patience can close doors faster than it opens them. Sovereignty without cooperation can harden borders while weakening trust. The Sahel's future will not be decided by declarations alone, but by whether its institutions can deliver predictability, restraint, and tangible improvements in daily life. Here is the uncomfortable projection that now looms. If the alliance fails to deepen military coordination, civilian oversight, and diplomatic channels within the next several months, incidents like the emergency aircraft landing may cease to be isolated. They could become signals in a wider pattern of escalation, drawing neighbors, investors, and global powers into a cycle no one intends to start. Yet there is also another path, one where security serves life rather than dominates it, one where economic sovereignty brings food, light, and work before it brings confrontation, one where leaders remember that authority is strongest when it calms fear instead of amplifying it. For those who believe in justice, dignity, and the quiet strength of order, this moment invites reflection rather than reaction. The rise of a more self-directed Africa does not threaten the world if it is guided by wisdom. It warns the world only when restraint is forgotten. If this story has caused you to pause, to think about how power should be used and whom it should protect, hold on to that thought. Conversations shaped by conscience often matter more than decisions made in haste. May God grant clarity to those who command forces, courage to those who protect their families, and peace to a region standing at a crossroads. Because what happens next in Burkina Faso and across the Sahel will not only define Africa's path, it will test whether strength and stability can still walk together in a world that desperately needs both.